Order. Bim Afalai to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to open this debate in Westminster Hall. Now, members of the House may or may not know this, but the Minister is a very keen historian. And, he was in gainful employment before he came into politics. And, and the great thing about this debate being in Westminster Hall is it is the site, the very site, of the 1265 Parliament, which was where Simon de Montfort made his name. And I don't want to give a history lesson, least of all to the Minister, who would know the history much better than I do. But the broad principles of that Parliament, why it is noted, is that it was about the relationship between the localities and the centre. It was about the powers of the Crown and Parliament and the magnates, whether they be barons or others in the country, and not just taxation. And I think that when you consider that point, Madam Chair, that though money and tax matters hugely, and indeed it's the story largely of how Parliament developed, other things matter as well for the health of this United Kingdom, particularly the relationship between local areas and regions and the centre. And that is what I wanted to address this afternoon. Anybody, the millions of people watching this debate today, may think to themselves, what is the point of debating something like the Constitution and indeed devolution? I mean, these things are just there, they change quite slowly. Why should we give up our time to particularly think about this and debate this today? I would suggest that, broadly speaking, there are two big reasons why this debate doesn't just matter always, but particularly matters now. The first is it is no surprise to anybody in this chamber, or indeed the House, that our union and our constitutional arrangements have been under strain in recent years. That's not just the relationship between the four nations of the United Kingdom, but also within those nations. And that has had all sorts of political consequences, and it is very important, principally, that we find better ways of working together as four nations and within our nations as we can. So that's the first reason. It is for the health of our country, in its sort of most fundamental sense, it's important that we debate this and come to broader agreement. The second is about the economy. And it also would not come as any surprise to anybody in this House that in our numerous debates on the economy, in our interminable discussions about inequality, levelling up, regional disparity, at the core of that, and as both sides of the House, I would say, in quite a responsible way, have competing visions sometimes about how best to address these problems, I think what we all share is the need to address them. And that governance and how this country is run and how this country works is central to the economic future of this country as much as decisions around tax and regulation and public spending. I yield the floor.
I thank the honourable member for Hitchin and Harden for giving way and for making such a powerful opening speech thus far. I've just come from a meeting with Cheshire and Warrington business leaders, and indeed they're echoing exactly what the honourable member is saying. But the frustration is that they've made a plea for a devolution deal for Cheshire and Warrington, and yet they still haven't had a reply from government ministers. So we agree, and there's an appetite out there. So, yeah.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and it is very well timed, because I'm about to come to this very point that he is making. Not so much about the tardiness of response from government ministers, but more about the necessary the necessary engagement around devolution deals and other such mechanisms between localities and the centre. And let me come to that point now. I think that it is fundamentally important that we regularise the local government and devolution structures across England in particular. And I will come to the other nations. But if we first focus around England, because that indeed was the intervention, at the moment, in a county such as Hertfordshire, we have district councils and a county council. In central Bedfordshire, for example, neighbouring county, we have a unitary system. In the Tees Valley, you have a mayoralty, but the powers are different in that mayoralty from the West Midlands, and the powers again are different in London. And there are probably certain other forms of local government that I've missed out as well. Whenever you speak to people trying to navigate their way through our local government structures, they will often say to you, and they definitely say to me, it takes them forever to figure out who's responsible for what. And I haven't even mentioned things like the local enterprise partnerships, for example, or the chambers of commerce, which overlap all of these structures, let alone NHS trusts, ICBs, all sorts of other things that cut across these structures. And the reason why I mention this is that it is critical both for the democratic health, and again, holding in mind those two things, both the health of our democracy and how our country runs, and also economic growth. I think it is absolutely critical to regularise these local government structures so that we don't actually need to worry about whether you get a devolution deal in this area or not, whether the right minister or the right MP is lobbying in the most effective way. Everybody will have a clear sense, broadly speaking, of whether you're in one of three areas. You are either in a county, in which case we should have unitaries. You are in a smaller urban area, in which case you should have a mayoralty with certain powers. Or you are in a larger urban area, such as, for example, Manchester or London, where the mayoralty should probably have different powers, perhaps greater powers. But we need to regularise this so that finally we can move to a system where people understand what the powers are, who's responsible for what. Because actually that responsibility is so critical in the democratic health, but also for economic investment and economic growth. For example, I was recently in Germany, and whenever you speak to German businesses and you say, well, how does it work with investment, whether it be into Germany or indeed into the UK, they will often say, if they're doing it to most countries in Europe, they will go to if it's a city, they'll go to the local mayoralty, or they will go to the region. But in England, I say that very precisely, in England, they often don't know exactly who to go to. And even when they do, for example, if in my county you were to come to make investment in life sciences in Stevenage, which is a hugely growing area and doing very, very well, you may come to the borough council, but then they would say you'd also need to speak to the county council about different things. And you may also need to speak to North Herts District Council about certain other things. And that inhibits our potential economic growth in this country. And I just use that as one example. So I think that regularising the relationships and standardising them is very important. But it's not just that, because let's just assume that we manage to do that. And we do get a sense of standardised local government structure. That people start to understand who's responsible for what. I think it's important, and this is now linking it back with Westminster, that the local leaders, we often talk about the importance of local leaders. Those local leaders have a more direct relationship with Westminster as well. It shouldn't just be you elect your member of parliament and indeed a government in the general election. You elect your local leader, but yet the relationships between the local leader and the centre aren't formalised. I think we should move to a system where the local leaders, in a more standardised fashion, have formal mechanisms where they can engage with central government and indeed Parliament. I think you could perhaps use the House of Lords, perhaps as positions in an ex officio capacity, but it may not necessarily need to be that. But the broader principle is a more formalised way in which leaders from Cheshire, for example, have a formal relationship with Westminster and Whitehall that enables them to lobby, enables them to make their voice heard, enables MPs to feed into that process effectively, so that we are getting much better governance of not just Cheshire, but hearing the example of Cheshire that might benefit Hertfordshire, for example. And I think that regularising these things would not cost much money, if any at all. Wouldn't have to pay them extra. It wouldn't change a huge amount. But what it would do is to make sure that the voice of local people and local leaders is heard here in Parliament. Of course.
In terms of regularisation, I'm not sure what exactly he's proposing that looks like. So in Scotland, we've got a system of unitary authorities with 32 local councils that meet together in COSLA, and COSLA is the forum where the negotiations with the government happen. So the local leaders are all members and involved in COSLA, and they have that relationship with the government through that system. Is he suggesting something similar with a kind of unitary authority structure?
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. And like the previous intervention, she provides me with a perfect segue to talk about Scotland, and indeed Wales and Northern Ireland as well. Because I think that it is important, if we live in one United Kingdom, which we do, and I appreciate we have with the Honourable Lady, we have a opposition on that particular question, but it's important that the local people in all parts of the United Kingdom have broadly similar relationships with the centre, with Westminster and Whitehall, everywhere, regardless of whether there is a devolved assembly, devolved parliament or not. And I think that by doing that, what we will help to do is knit our country closer together and again build the understanding and awareness of responsibilities with the population and indeed with business and economic actors both within this country and outside it. The final part of my remarks relates to the second chamber in the House of Lords. Now, people have been talking about Lords reform for over 100 years. And I'm pretty sure that maybe in 100 years' time they'll still be talking about Lords reform, though I don't intend to be here by then. You never know. But it is really important. I'm personally not a proponent of an elected chamber, personally, but I do strongly understand and recognise those who feel that it does need an elected element to it. It is clear to me that a way of helping to sort out some of the glaring inconsistencies and problems with the House of Lords that we are all familiar with, whether it be a sense that it is too big, whether it be a concern about certain people who've been nominated to it, a fact that there's no retirement age, various other things that a lot of people have problem with, in my view, very reasonably. We can try and kill two birds with one stone by engaging local leaders in the broader governance of the country by using the second chamber partly to help that process happen. I think that by doing that, we would help the voice of local people, because they wouldn't just be electing a local leader to deal with their local issues, and that was that. That local leader would then have a national voice that would help the governance of the wider country. And I think that that is presumably what we're all here to do, which is to help the governance of our own country. And where you have local leaders who have something to add and something to offer, that should be shared and voiced, and that should benefit everybody. So in my view, we should use the House of Lords in order to do that. There are other aspects to House of Lords reform that it would be, of course.
I hope we can all agree that the bishops and the hereditary peers have no place in a House of Lords. But on that particular point, at the moment, the House of Lords is disproportionately represented by peers from London and the South East. So I wondered if you could just outline what could be done to improve the representation from other parts of England and indeed from other parts of the United Kingdom.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. This is how I think this could work. along with what I was saying about local leaders, with a standardized system of local government, whether it be unitaries or whether you live in a mayoralty, whether you be in England, Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland, that would by necessity be spread all over the United Kingdom. So that's how you build in a lot of regional balance. Secondly, how you would be able to change this is you would, in essence, make sure that by the weight of the total number, you always had at least a significant minority, if not at least 50%, that was represented in that sort of way, rather than just the appointments. Because ultimately, you can't make lifetime appointments on a regional basis. Even if you tried to, people are free to move around. Whereas if by necessity, by ex officio, the mayor of Newcastle had a right, whilst they were mayor, to speak in the second chamber, I think that you would give it that regional balance. And why I think this matters is not just because of improvement democratic accountability, not just because of economic growth and helping investors understand who to go to, but actually what you would do is you would help spread good practice and good ideas. Because the reason why constitutions matter is because of what they actually practically do to the governance of the country. And what we currently have is ad hoc relationships depending on the political colour of the government and on whatever, for example, when you've got mayoralties, it is, so it depends on the political colour. It also depends on particular individuals, whether they're perceived to be effective or not. Now, to some degree, that is always the case. But what we need to try and build in is where we find good practice happening somewhere, highlight that good practice and have a vehicle for that to be aired in a public forum. Parliament, if it is nothing else, is a vehicle for public airing of issues and debate. And I think that by linking both the local governance and the review of the second chamber in that way, it would be quite effective. The last thing I'd like to say is just to give a little bit more detail about why economically it makes a big difference if we get more control and more standardized control of how our local government works, and particularly links in with central government. For most of the 20th century, if you look at the data, and I like data, it's important, inequality in GDP terms between the regions of the United Kingdom was actually quite low by European standards in the United Kingdom. But by 2010, we started to perform quite badly in comparison with our European partners, and we've continued to perform badly in that vein. And the consequence of there being high degree of regional inequality, for what it's worth, I happen to think that's more about the strength of London rather than the weakness of certain parts of the country, though we can have a debate about that. The consequence of that happening has been broadly twofold. The first is, frankly, political problems in certain parts of the country where they feel left behind, they feel that economically they haven't been given a fair shake, calls to reform the Green Book and the Treasury, all sorts of political shenanigans and things that members opposite will fully appreciate, and indeed we do on this side of the House as well. And the second is that it's contributed significantly to our national productivity problem, which is well documented, and it's out of scope for this debate to go into in detail. But to put it simply, if you have big portions of the country that are performing very poorly economically, even if in the area in the London and the South East you're doing quite well, overall as a country you're not going to improve your economy by as much as you need to if you've got lots of poorly performing regions. How does effective devolution help this problem? Surely some people might argue, well, maybe it's just about tax policy passed in Westminster, or indeed education policy or skills or whatever it is. The reason why effective devolution, standardized and regularized in the way that I'm describing, will help is that there are two broad reasons why economists describe that our productivity and our regional inequality is great in this country. The first is poor transport infrastructure in huge swathes of our country. The second is poor policy around innovation clusters, particularly in areas of high skill, particularly around universities. And if you compare us to other countries, they're just doing better on those two things particularly, though, as I say, the economic debate is broad. If we had more effective power for local leaders, more of a voice to spread good practice, a clearer understanding of who's responsible for what and when, and a more effective fiscal package for each of those local areas, and that's what I will come to next, I am willing to submit to you that we would perform better in both of those areas. Because it is impossible for any centre of government in Whitehall and in Westminster to focus appropriately on every single need of every single part of the country. Because we make broader national policy here, and indeed international policy. You can't deal effectively with everywhere. That's the role of local leaders. And helping them do that better, whether it be for transport infrastructure, whether it be for skills and innovation clusters around top universities and areas of learning, that, I think, is what we need to do. But of course, in order to do that effectively, you've got to talk about money. You know, it's easy for me to talk about powers. It's easy for me to talk about things should be better and more effective. But we have to talk about the money available, not just for local authorities and local leaders to spend, but also what they're accountable for raising. Because one of the difficulties politically, and I'll be very candid with the House, that I know that I have felt, and many people on our side may have felt at certain times, is that you may have certain leaders, certain local leaders in this country who seek to blame Westminster for all that goes wrong and take the credit for everything that goes right. No. Now, I know that this would be a shock to any politician, that any politician would think of doing something like that. But in this country, we're incredibly centralized fiscally. About 12% of all taxes are spent and raised locally in this country. That is the lowest in the G7 by some stretch. The next one is Italy, which is about 17%. The next is Germany, by about 30%. Canada is about 50%. And the United States is somewhere between 40 and 50%, depending on how you calculate it. We are an outlier in this. And though I don't want to stray beyond the subject of this debate into Treasury policy, we've got the budget for that. And I know the minister, who'd be itching to weigh in on the Treasury, will hold himself back in this regard. I think that when we are thinking of raising more revenue, we should be thinking about doing that as close to people where that money is spent as possible. And we should therefore be enabling local areas, politically being able to raise more money because people would know what they're responsible for and how, in a more standardized way, to raise more money locally. And by raising that more money locally, they would be able they'd have responsibility for it, they'd be accountable for it, and it would have a higher degree of trust that that money was going to be spent well, because if that money isn't spent well, the local people would vote for somebody else, and that's how democracy works. So I would finish by saying, yes, we need the powers to be regularised. Yes, I think local leaders across the whole United Kingdom need to be linked in much more closely with Westminster. I haven't touched on the powers of the devolved Parliament because actually I'm not convinced that necessarily there is a huge shift in power that we require at devolved level that's necessary. But I do think that we should, when we think from England, we should make sure that what we are doing in England, we try and mirror. And I thought the honourable lady from the SNP, her description of how local government in Scotland interacts with Holyrood actually is the sort of model that we could bring in on a broader UK-wide basis. But the money really matters, and enabling local areas, local leaders to raise and spend more of their own money, whether it be around property taxes, whether it be local income tax, whether it be a reformed version of business rates, however we choose to do it, but having that as the discussion rather than always just relying on Westminster to raise all the money and dole it out. I think that would be an effective way to build our democratic union, our understanding of how we are governed, and indeed help our economy as well. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the future of the UK Constitution and devolution. I shall be moving to wind up to the opposition spokesperson at about 3:30. Justin Madders.
Thank you, Mr. Vice. See you in the chair this afternoon, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for his very detailed introduction, much of which I agreed with. I think, as many members are, I'm a passionate advocate of devolution. I'm a passionate advocate of devolution because I'm also a passionate advocate of democracy. And when I see surveys that tell us that more than 50% of adults believe that it does not matter who you vote for, nothing will ever change. And over 60% of people believe that Britain has a ruling class who will always rule the country, no matter what. Then the message to me is very clear that something needs to change, because democracy is a fragile thing. It cannot be taken for granted. And the way that we protect our democracy, I believe, is to make sure that decision-making is brought closer to people so they have greater confidence in the decisions that are actually being taken on their behalf. Not making areas jump through multiple hoops at the cost of great time and expense to join a competitive bidding process that is often neither fair nor transparent, the terms of which are often also ultimately dictated by the centre. We can do better than that, and I believe it should be the case that empowering local communities to choose their priorities is what genuine devolution should be about. And it seems to me, speaking as a former council leader and having a former council leader to my left as well, that there is a certain level of distrust and snobbiness about the ability of our local leaders to be granted the additional levels of power and resources, because, as we have heard already, and as we know, the biggest prizes on offer always seem to come with the precondition that you need an elected mayor. I believe our local councils have proven themselves as being more than capable of working together, particularly through the pandemic, when there are multiple examples of them working cross-border and on a sub-regional basis. Now, my constituency of Ellesmere Port and Neston is governed by Cheshire West and Chester Council, along with Cheshire East and Warrington Councils. It forms part of the Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnership. It's not a metropolitan area, it's not a city region, it doesn't have a single urban centre. It is made up of several large towns, one city and a considerable number of smaller towns and villages. So it doesn't really have an established identity, it's not a defined place as such, and it is made up of separate areas of economic activity. Certainly in my part of the world, we look towards North Wales and Merseyside as much as we look across Cheshire. And this is significant because although a case can be made for a single figurehead for a city or a city region, it should be recognised that non-metropolitan areas have significantly different sets of circumstances. And being no doubt, I warmly welcome the opportunities any devolution deal will bring to my area. I'm not convinced that we need a mayor to deliver on that. So I genuinely hope there is a real opportunity to improve our area, and it's not lost because of government intransigence over the governance arrangements. If it is the government's position that if there's no mayor, then the biggest opportunities for devolution are denied to us, then I do not believe that we should forgive such a petulant and inflexible approach. I suspect the public that we represent will not forgive such an approach either, because genuine devolution is not about telling areas what governance they must have. It is not about creating extra layers of bureaucracy. It is not about dictation from the centre. And as we know, power flows in this country towards London, wealth flows towards London and the South East, upwards into Westminster, and we often see any power and resources that are given away going on Westminster terms with their priorities being at the forefront. And I believe that's the wrong approach. For too long, people have felt left behind and held back by a system that doesn't work for them. People already feel that they don't have the power to take important decisions about things in their lives that are most important to them, whether it's a local hospital that should stay open, where a new school might go, even how often the buses run. To empower local areas, we need a different approach, a long-term approach that actually attempts to tackle the underlying issues and really empowers local communities by giving them the responsibility, the power and the resources to shape their own futures. Dare I say, allowing them to take back control. So my plea to the Minister today is, please meet with us. Give us the keys to unlock the potential for our area. I've been here for nearly 8 years now, and throughout that time we've heard many times how the government is prepared to allow greater devolution in Cheshire, but we always get left behind. We are seeking devolved powers, particularly in transport, in buses, for example. As we know, we're currently at the mercy of bus companies pulling services out at a moment's notice. But we also want to improve economic regeneration and get more housing into the right areas to meet the local housing need. There is a well-developed plan that's been on the shelf for many years now, and we just want the opportunity to deliver it. So leave preconditions about mayors that don't have local support at the door and instead talk to us about what more we can do to improve the lives of the people we represent. Don't dictate to us, liberate us. That is what genuine devolution is all about.
Robin Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I hope in the next, about the next 6 or 7 minutes, Madam Chairman, just to set out perhaps a contra view of the Union, because it seems at times when we hear about a debate like this, and I must compliment my honourable friend for bringing this debate forward. Other colleagues here will know that this is a subject close to my heart, and so something which I've given considerable thought to. You may think differently at the end of my speech, but I hope you will find it interesting nonetheless. But sometimes when we approach a subject like this, we take that, the old joke of a visitor coming to a rural area and asking directions, and the farmer or whoever it is leaning on the gate says, well, if I were you, I wouldn't start from here. And I sometimes feel when we approach this, there is that, well, let's just disregard where we're at and let's start from some idealistic blank page or some other framework which doesn't exist in reality. But if we believe hard enough, if we screw our eyes up tight enough, we can imagine it is that way, and we can start from there, and a bright new dawn awaits us ahead. And I just don't think that's where we're at. So I'm afraid when I hear words like regularising, I immediately think of words like, you know, cookie cutter and wait your turn and stand in place, because that big stamp which is coming along is going to get you as well and turn you into something, a movable piece which fits with the rest of the puzzle that's been created somewhere else. And I find instinctively that that doesn't fit with me. So what you're not going to hear from me now is a defence of the status quo. And also I would make the point that this is not an exercise in party political point scoring, as members have avoided doing so far, and I commend them for that. But this is about exploring what does the Union mean, what does its future hold, what role devolution might have to play in that. Because I actually hold an organic view of a union that has started and has developed inevitably from things like our location in the world, the temperate climate we enjoy, our maritime nature and identity have all contributed to the nation that we are. We cannot ignore that, we should not, and we would not wish to. But the system of law which we have as well, again, an important part of our identity. Identity, there we are, our reputation, for good or for ill, around the world. How has that developed? The values that we hold, the Judeo-Christian principles which have been at the heart of so much of who we are as a nation. These things have shaped us. Inevitably, then, this has dictated and shaped the relationships that we have formed around the globe. When Bill Gates came here a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to ask him, why has he come to the UK government? And he said very simply, because of your network of relationships around the globe. He recognised that history, that depth of contact and relationship that we had across the globe and the influence that came with it. And of course, from that then comes economy. The economy, we are the 5th largest economy, maybe the 6th largest economy in the world, and part of that is because of this network of relationships. Part of that, too, is driven by the internal relationships which we have forged and the transport links that have already been mentioned across all parts of our United Kingdom. And finally, of course, we then need to think about the future. So in terms of understanding ourselves as a union, what is it that we're moving towards? And that's an absolutely salient and current question, which again I commend the member, my honourable friend, for bringing this forward, because it is exactly, I think, the question that we face now. Because that is, what are we now that we are a post-Brexit Britain? If we are no longer on a trajectory into a federalist liberal social democracy within the EU, where are we heading? And I know some would say, oh, it's back to days of empire and colonial oppression, this kind of thing. I don't think it is. But the question is, what are we then heading to? So that's the union that I think of, and I think it's absolutely correct then to think, well, what does the future hold? Time doesn't allow me to perhaps develop these points in the way that I would wish, but I would make a couple of key points. And the first one is I would contrast the covenant that I think that holds us together with the contract that is presented in the form of devolution. The covenants that I think hold us together, those relationships built on shared dreams, shared ventures, shared losses, shared institutions that we've built upon the values we hold together, all of these things, that speaks to me of covenant and a vested interest in what every other part of the union is thinking, is feeling, is experiencing, is hoping. And I contrast that with what we did by devolution. Now, let me be clear, I fully support the democratic establishment of devolved assemblies and devolved parliaments across the UK. You won't find any disagreement with me for what has been established democratically. But I think the biggest damage that has been done to our union was not in the creation of those institutions as much as convincing us that the relationship is now not a covenantal one, but a contractual one, a transactional one, which says, you now do these bits, you now make these decisions on these policy areas, and we'll give you some money for it. And just as I wouldn't dream of trying to do that with my own marriage, trying to turn that covenant into a contract and a series of transactions, right, Robin, on a Monday you do the bins, and on a Wednesday I'll wash the dishes, it just doesn't work. And it's the same for our union. So these phrases like regularising and a focus on a kind of technocratic design do chill me a bit, because it doesn't capture the essence of who I think we are. Madam Chairman, I need to bring my remarks to a close, so I'll just say this, that when we start to look at how that contract operates, things like accountability, we do start to find flaws within it. Again, I'm a supporter of subsidiarity, this idea that decisions should be made as close to the local point of impact as possible. But we must not imagine that what we have done is perfect or even is replicable, should be replicable. There are deep problems which I don't have time to develop today. Madam Chairman, let me just finish with one analogy, if I may. We'll all be familiar with new housing estates, and very often in the middle of them is a green space. And when those houses go up and the green space is marked out, very quickly, brown lines, faint at first, start to appear, cutting across. There's actually a phrase for this. They're called desire lines. And almost always, it seems, they don't reflect the footpaths that have been in place. You know what I'm talking about, I'm sure, Madam Chairman. It's where residents have decided that the shortest way from A to B is to walk across the green. And that is absolutely a metaphor for the way that the mistakes that we have made and the lessons we need to learn about how we think about our institutions and how we think about our union, I would suggest. Is that temptation to say, we can create a beautiful place. We can put down straight lines, maybe even curved lines, which reflect what people want to do. And we would quickly find that people's actual desires, that organic response to the environment, that thrust of where ambition and hopes and dreams and relationships and ties takes them, cuts across it, creates those desire lines, not always in the place we design. I would urge caution in imagining that technocratic cleverness could take us to a better union, and urge us to consider properly that organic model that we have that has grown, the covenant that holds us together, and I believe a bright future that holds us ahead. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
And I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. Samantha Dixon.
Thanks very much, Mr Favag. It's a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship. And I'd also like to congratulate the honourable gentleman for securing this debate on an issue which is really important to the local authorities, businesses and constituents in my areas. And I'm pleased it's not just a debate about the devolution of the nations, but devolution within England as well. The question of devolution to Cheshire and Warrington is something I've been working on a long time before I was elected as a Member of Parliament. It's a journey which started when I was the leader of Cheshire West and Chester Council, and one which I'm determined to continue now as Chester's representative in Parliament. Cheshire and Warrington has so much potential and so much to offer, and a devolution deal would give our region even more opportunity to fulfil this. Cheshire and Warrington has an important role to play in partnership with mayoral combined authorities in Greater Manchester and Liverpool City region, and as a gateway to North Wales and the North West of England. We've built a very successful, inclusive economy, embarked on a net zero agenda, and developed projects around public service transformation. The three local authorities of Cheshire West and Chester, Cheshire East Council and Warrington Borough Council have worked closely as a sub-region over many years alongside partners in policing, fire, health and the local enterprise partnership. Compared to the complex governance outlined by the Honourable Gentleman earlier, the current system of collaboration between the three leaders of our three councils provides a strong, simple model that reflects our geography, history and identity of our different places. There is no need for local government reorganisation. We did that 15 years ago, and my honourable friend from Ellesmere Port and Neston has the scars to show.
Yeah.
With so much talent and potential locally, it simply makes sense for powers to be devolved and for decisions to be made closer to home by local people who understand what our region needs and what it can offer. A devolved Cheshire and Warrington could further progress their work on transforming our transport networks, backing our towns and rural communities, creating green jobs, achieving net zero. Indeed, the list goes on. The potential is endless. Locally, there's a real drive to see Cheshire and Warrington as one place with one voice. This is based on a shared culture and history within the county that also respects distinct local identities. Too often, it feels like Cheshire's left behind. Too often, my constituents express their concerns that Cheshire and Warrington risks missing out on the funding and freedoms enjoyed by our neighbours in the cities. Can I point out to the Minister, a devolution deal for Cheshire and Warrington is not only beneficial for our region, but the region's strong economic base can also help meet the government's levelling up goals, in particular the Cheshire Science Corridor and net zero ambition. There's no point pitting region against region for funding. The only true way to resolve this is through devolution. So I have one simple question for the Minister today. What plans does his department have to consider a devolution for Cheshire and Warrington? And will they meet representatives from across the area to discuss this further? Thank you.
James Grundy.
Thank you, Chairman, and it's a pleasure to serve the Regional Chairmanship. And I'd also like to thank the Honourable Member for Hitchin and Harpenden for bringing this debate today. However, it is unusual, I think, on this occasion that I find myself, as my honourable friend from North Wales said, that I have some doubts about his vision for regularisation, uniformity, conformity. I would say that my view is that devolution, and honourable members opposite have said this, is not a one-size-fits-all process. As has been rightly said, I think, by members opposite, that actually a mayor is a deeply unsuitable model for some of the non-city areas. Indeed, there are even some within cities that feel that the mayoral model is not appropriate. Certainly not the Osbornian model. And I think, and I will say this from some experience speaking to people across the North West, that I think the view, not just in Cheshire, but in Lancashire as well, that a combined authority model or something similar, as used to happen with the pre-existing GMCA before the mayoralty was created in Greater Manchester, is a much more collegiate and sensible model. I think, and I was speaking to colleagues in Lancashire about this, who said that a mayoralty wouldn't work. You couldn't have one person representing the interests of everywhere from Silverdale to Skelmersdale and do a good job, because there's considerable diversity within that area. It's a considerable geographic area, and putting all that into the hands of one person, I think, is the wrong model. And my understanding is that colleagues in Cheshire on the Conservative side feel similarly that a mayoral model would not be. I'll give way to my own friend.
Look, I would like to thank him for his speech, and I'm listening with interest, and he's thought a lot about these matters. What I would like to clarify for him is that, you know, if we're thinking of organic change and development, in a small c conservative as well as a big C conservative way. What I was suggesting was working with the grain of what has already happened, which is, for example, in the West Midlands or indeed in Greater Manchester where we have a mayor. So could he just clarify whether what he's suggesting is that we actually go back on what we have already done in certain areas such as Greater Manchester with the mayoralty, and that's perfectly reasonable and fine, but I just want to clarify because actually a more small c conservative way of thinking about it is to say, we have already established a mayoralty in certain places, let's work with that and then try and smooth out the huge distinctions between areas rather than say, let's revert to a period of time before there was a mayoralty.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I do not at this stage argue for the abolition of the mayoralty, although I know that there are some that do. Some feel it hasn't worked the way it should. There is certainly, and I think this is a view of Greater Manchester Conservative colleagues, that in Greater Manchester, the mayoral model, as distinct from the one in London, has no assembly to hold the mayor to account. So scrutiny, accountability, responsibility is not there. And I think equally, that I actually welcome the fact that there are slightly different models around the country, because different models take account of the different needs of different areas. And whether that's different powers between different mayoralties, or indeed not using a mayor, using the combined authority model or a similar model, collaboration between existing local authorities, I think it is a benefit of the system, not necessarily a downside. Now, where everyone agrees that certain powers should be devolved down further, I think that is something that absolutely should happen. But where there is discord, where there is dissent, where people feel it's not really appropriate, then it should not happen. And I think that having cross-party support, which I think there probably is in Cheshire on what they're trying to do there, then I think that is clearly the model that should be undertaken. And I agree with what's been said by members opposite about a mayor not being appropriate for Cheshire, given that it does not have one major metropolitan centre. And equally, the point he made, and you'll be amused at this, I have no doubt, Madam Chairman, the creation of large unitary authorities can sometimes be controversial. I would point out that my own seat of Lee in 1973 was greatly distressed to be merged with the neighbouring rival town of Wigan, which the honourable gentleman may have heard me speak about on some occasion before in a previous role that he served in. And there was a great phrase at the time which I think illustrates the problem with devolution if it's done the wrong way. In 1973, the campaign against the creation of huge metropolitan authorities, sort of what was seen as taking away power from local communities and giving them to a larger, more remote one, was "Don't vote for Mr. R.E. Moat," which did cause problems for Conservative candidate Roger Moat during the following election. And I think that's how people feel, that sometimes they feel that power is being taken further away. And to finish off, because I realise that we're pressed for time, and I think there are probably others who wish to speak, devolution down to regions does not always work. And I'll give him a good example of this. And he talked about transport. And I think he's right in principle, absolutely 100%. In the mid-1960s, one of the predecessor local authorities to Wigan, Goulburn Urban District Council, wrote to the government talking of the desperate need for a bypass for the town of Lee and the villages of Loughton and Goulburn, who were all mining communities at that time. Now, about 60 years on, we're still waiting for that bypass to be finished, because the problem is that bypass would run all the way from Bolton down through Lee and then down to Warrington. Now, in 1984, when I was a small boy, the middle bit of that bypass was finished. The bit that runs from virtually the border with Bolton down to the border with Warrington. But either end has not been finished. And that's because it runs across 3 different local authorities and 2 counties, Cheshire and Greater Manchester. If you believe Greater Manchester is a county, which is a point of debate amongst many people. Certainly people in Saddleworth would get very angry if you said they weren't in Yorkshire. Just devolving powers down to the mayor would not work, because you'd still have to deal with the problem of Cheshire. So I actually think when it comes to infrastructure, yes, and well, it's perhaps a blunt way of describing it, but actually, in some cases, it would be better if some of these powers, the responsibility for delivering some of this local infrastructure, but in a fragmented manner, were taken up to departmental level, as we do with national schemes, and other powers devolved down. So I think the problem we have is, and I think by and large this has been a sort of a non-partisan debate, and I fundamentally welcome that. The answer is to listen to local representatives for the model of devolution they want, with the suite of powers that they want, and to not be too prescriptive about the model and powers. I think standardisation is the wrong way, although I understand what he was trying to argue. And if we do that, we'll get the best version of devolution, with proper scrutiny and accountability, and a system that actually works and that local people believe in. The worst thing we could do is impose a uniform model of devolution to everyone, whether they want it or not. I think the government would lose the goodwill of a goodly number of backbenchers if we tried to do that, as well as facing considerable opposition from the other side of the House. And with that, I will say I'm a great champion of localism, and that the founding principle of devolution must be localism. As I said before, one size does not fit all. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a real pleasure to speak on this debate. And may I first of all thank my colleague and friend for Hitchin and Harberton for what I believe is a timely debate. And for us in Northern Ireland, it's pertinent even more, because the title of the debate is Future of the UK Constitution and Devolution. How important that is for us. I'm ever mindful that we are in the middle of a proposal from the Prime Minister, and I don't intend to develop that debate in the Chamber, but I want to, if I can, Madam Chair, just say what's really important for me. This union is of the utmost importance to me. The flag that made up our four nations means so much to me personally and to the people that I represent. This House in the Central Lobby, I never failed to go into the Central Lobby and look at the four nations together as one. Four nations as one. And that I say that respectfully to my honourable friend and lady in the front bench here, because I do believe we're stronger together. But I want to just make that plea, if I can, for why the union is important to me. And it's also because my family and many other families have given the ultimate sacrifice, given their lives in service to the flag and the union that it represents. I'm sure there's not one person in this room, Madam Chair, who doesn't understand what I'm saying by that. Doesn't understand why the union is important to us. My cousin Kenneth Smith is a sergeant in the Ulster Defence Regiment, murdered by the IRA on 10th of December 1971 by those who couldn't abide his service to the union under this flag, the union flag. So I've said previously that the red line debate on Northern Ireland, it's not a line in pain over pride. It's a line in the blood of the people, of those we have loved and missed to this very day. That is why the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland means so much to so many of us that are honoured to take our seats in this, the mother of parliaments. The pride that it gives me, the privilege and the honour it is to be here and to serve the people of Strangford in Northern Ireland is something that I never take lightly. Our responsibility to do all we can to convince many of you, others, without that experience of why we cling to our position in the great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Devolution, as the title says, is essential. People with local knowledge and accountable to local people is vital. And that is why I support devolution and why it's important that we have that in place. I know that some today may be saying, then get back to it, that it's a crux of the DUP issue. The last thing we wanted was to walk away from Stormont. We believe in it, as imperfect as it is. We have lived for years under an absent, faceless civil service-led decision-maker, and it wasn't good, and we recognise the dangers of that. However, when faced with the insidious protocol and the burden that it placed on local businesses, as well as the devastation caused to our constitutional decision, we had to take that decision. The future of Northern Ireland within this union is worth every sacrifice that we have given, and indeed every sacrifice that we ask for. And that is why, Madam Chair, excuse me, our MLAs took the decision overwhelmingly, knowing that their pay would be cut and they would have difficulty making ends meet in their family. The union of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland means that much to them as it does to me. That is why we were thankful for the PM's intervention and his negotiation. But we do have to seek a legal opinion, and that will be back within, I understand, within 2 weeks, because we have to understand what the intricacies of this agreement and the Windsor Framework means. We don't want the Windsor Framework to become the Windsor knot for us who are of a unionist persuasion. So we need to know the full detail, full understanding, and ultimately we seek the people of Northern Ireland's opinion, whom we represent in relation to this deal. Time stops for no man, Madam Chair, no woman either. And I understand that I'm not a young man. I recognise that I've seen a few more years on the clock than probably nearly everybody in this chamber, I suspect. But that's just the way things are. I still feel young, by the way. My thoughts turn to the legacy that I will leave my children and my grandchildren and my constituency of Strangford. And the fact is that I will leave a legacy. I hope to leave a legacy as someone who stood over the decisions taken as being in the best interests of Northern Ireland in this great nation. I don't say that lightly, Madam Chair. It means that much to me, as I believe it means to many, many others in this chamber today. For me, devolution is the way forward, but that cannot be in place without the unionist people having a seat at this table. And we have been put out in the cold for sticking to our principles. I would remind everyone gently but sincerely, two prominent architects of the agreement and the peace settlement in Northern Ireland was Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern. Both of those gentlemen of prominence in the Republic of Ireland, but also as former Prime Minister here, have both said that no agreement can go forward without the full consideration given for those of a unionist persuasion. In other words, agreement can never be an agreement without our input. We are a sturdy people and will remain there until the resolution is one that will leave a stable Northern Ireland in the Union for my 6 grandchildren I have and for every grandchild across the whole of the nation. I will be urging my MLAs to nominate a Speaker as soon as I can face the Unionist people with the knowledge that devolution and democracy are not to be circumnavigated to ensure that we can celebrate the Good Friday Agreement, and not simply because the President of the United States of America is declaring we must. I always minded, Madam Chair, I make this comment. I remember when he was first elected, I watched it on TV, and somebody had asked him, and he was going to a state celebration, and he said, "No Orange man is welcome here." Well, as an Orange man since 1981, I have great pride in my organisation, and I take great exception to the President's comments. And if I do meet him, I'll remind him he's shaking the hand of an Orange man, just to remind him of that particular occasion when he said and tried to denigrate us as Orange men. We will make the decisions for ourselves without any undue pressure from others, because that is what a sovereign nation does. And I believe that we have just about retained sovereignty in the mainland, if not in the Northern Ireland post-Brexit. If this framework is the way forward, then it will still be the way forward once we have time to study and to consult for the EU and their bureaucracy to dictate the timeline of our consultation, or try to, and study as something which cannot stand up to the true meaning of democracy. I believe strongly in democracy and the importance of it. I finish with these comments, Madam Chair. The Union means the world to me, and I will give everything in the world to protect it for my grandchildren, who deserve to grow, to live, to work and love in a thriving Northern Ireland. I look to each one in this room, from all parties, who believe in the UK Constitution and devolution, to ask that you listen, not to my words especially, but what the meaning of those words are. Understand my approach and stand with myself and with the Ulster men and the Ulster women and for the union of this Great Britain and Northern Ireland when the time comes. Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm glad to stand and speak in this debate on International Women's Day. Unfortunately, we are significantly outnumbered, but it is nice to have a woman in the chair and a fellow colleague, only one sadly, speaking, but speaking with a huge amount of knowledge that she brings to this to this role and experience. I'd like to thank the member for Hitchin and Harpenden for bringing this debate. He opened the debate with a very short history lesson. I'll give him credit, it was very interesting. This is also the building in which William Wallace was tried. If we're going to be talking about the history of the Constitution and devolution, then this has got a very important part in that part of Scotland's history and of the England's history as well. I'm going to talk about a number of different things that were mentioned. This has been a kind of quite disparate debate. There's been a lot of different takes on what is an incredibly broad title, so I can understand why everybody came to it with slightly different views and from slightly different positions. So I'll talk a bit about what a number of people have said around the room, and also about my views and my take on the debate title that we were given. Talking first about local authorities and the way that they work. As I said earlier, in Scotland we've got 32 unitary authorities. My constituency is Aberdeen North. My constituency is wholly within the Aberdeen City Council area. The actual headquarters for Aberdeen Shire Council are also in my constituency, though, because the Aberdeen Shire surrounds the city. So I have the honour of having 2 local authority headquarters in my patch, which I'm not sure that many MPs are able to say, certainly not in a Scottish sense. Those 32 local authorities work, as I said, through COSLA with a relationship with the government. And just in terms of some of the financial matters that were being spoken about, particularly by the member who brought forward the motion, as well as a number of others actually, we have in recent years instituted participatory budgeting for local authorities. So 1% of the budget of local authorities has to be spent through a participatory budgeting route. That means that those people in local communities are making the decision about where that money is spent, where regeneration money, in a lot of cases, where that regeneration money is spent to best improve those local communities. And it does work. It works because the people are choosing their priorities. It's not the priorities that are coming from the centre. It's the priorities that people are choosing. They're putting forward their suggestions. They're being costed up. And then decisions are being taken by people who have got the ability to vote if they live in certain areas of our city. I'm speaking specifically about Aberdeen, but we do it across Scotland. And that works. That makes a difference. That is helpful for returning power to local communities. We've done an awful lot about improving community empowerment in recent years, and a lot of improvement on things like community asset transfers, which mean that buildings that are no longer being used by City Council, for example, are transferred over to community groups who are then given the opportunity to run those. So they're transferred for very little money, which allows the groups an ability to have a place. So community asset transfers, and not just of buildings, in some cases it's tracts of land that have been transferred, and that has been incredibly successful. One of the things that could be done in order to improve local leaders is what we have done in Scotland in relation to paying councillors reasonable salaries. Now, I confess I've tried, and I do not understand the local government systems in England, because it seems to be different in all different parts of England, and I'm utterly baffled by the whole thing. But councillors are paid a salary in Scotland that is enough to, it's not enough to live on, it's supposed to be 2/3 of a full-time wage, because I don't know any councillor who only works 2/3 of the time, but it is an actual salary that they can be paid, absolutely.
I think, to try and give her some help on this, the different wage structures in England are often because the different tiers of authorities have different responsibilities, whereas the unitaries in Scotland, obviously, the responsibilities are uniform across that. So, for example, county councils deal with roads and potholes, and district authorities tend to deal with lower tier things, which sounds hilarious compared to potholes. I hope she understands that whilst the wage structure varies greatly, that is the reason why.
And I'm sure that he's absolutely correct in that, but the thing is that if we're not paying councillors a reasonable amount of money, we're not going to get people that are the high calibre local leaders that we need, the high calibre, the people that are able to dedicate, even able to dedicate the time for the money that they're being given, that they need to dedicate in order to do that role. So that's one of the things that I would suggest could be improved. In terms of the House of Lords, and the member that spoke from the back made a suggestion in relation to the House of Lords. I mean, I would say abolishing the House of Lords would be a better way forward than giving them more power. I mean, Labour first stood in a platform to abolish the House of Lords in 1910, and despite some moves towards towards having fewer hereditary peers, we have not got to the position of having no hereditary peers yet. I think that if we're going to be giving any more power to the unelected House of Lords, we need to have a very serious look at the way in which the House of Lords members are selected, particularly given recent events that we have seen. In terms of talking about constitutional reform, it is the case that the situation is broken, and it is the case that the situation is getting more broken. It is getting worse. We are supposed to have parliamentary sovereignty. We are supposed to have a situation where Parliament can and does make decisions. And I would disagree with the member from Aberconwy, who sort of suggested that you kind of need to look at what's here and try and fix it, I think, is rather than start with something new. In terms of the constitutional settlement, in terms of the way that this place works, I think we're beyond the level of tweaking and fixing. The whole idea that was proposed in relation to Brexit was about returning power. That's what people said. People said, we want Brexit because we want power to be returned. But what this Conservative government have done repeatedly over years is to move power away from Parliament and to the executive. And that is what continues to happen. We have seen, and we will see in the budget next week, I imagine that the Chancellor will put forward with the budget without an amendment of the law resolution. Now, this seems like a very small thing, but it makes a very, very significant difference to parliamentary power and parliamentary sovereignty. It is a change in the way that our constitution works that has just been slipped through, that has just been, one of the former chancellors wrote to the procedure committee and said, oh, this is just a tweak, this is just a small change. It's not, it's massive. It massively dilutes the power that MPs have in order to be able to amend the budget. Now, lastly, in terms of devolution specifically, and in terms of the settlement and situation in Scotland, we have got an agreed devolution settlement. The problem that we have is that the Westminster government, in their post-Brexit antics, in this return of power, have done what they can to return power from the Scottish Parliament, from Holyrood, to this place. Most recently, with this Section 35 order, which absolutely is in the Scotland Act. It is in the Scotland Act. It is only supposed to be used in extremis. It is only supposed to be used in a situation where there is a massive negative impact on the rest of the UK. And there is no good argument that the ministers can make in order for this to be the case. The only way in which we are going to solve this problem, the only way we're going to get that collegiate relationship between the Scottish Government and the UK Westminster Government is for Scotland to be an independent country, for us to be able to have this conversation on our terms, on the terms that the people of Scotland want us to have this conversation. Because in Scotland, it's not Parliament that's sovereign, it's the people of Scotland who are sovereign. And we intend that the people will be able to have their say and choose the way forward.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Ms Vargan. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and I congratulate the honourable member for Hitchin and Harpenden for securing this very important debate today. You know, I believe that our constitution, and particularly devolution ideas within that, holds the key to many of the challenges that we face as a country. And with the right approach to these issues, I think we can unlock the enormous potential of all our nations and regions and embark on a period of national renewal. And with characteristic courage, the honourable gentleman set out a full new constitutional settlement, which I thought was, you know, a very good place to start for debate. And I agreed with the need for greater coherence, but I also, I think, as the honourable member for Aberconwy and for Lee did, I'd probably stop short on standardisation. I think the clarity that he gave to that helped as well. I think this is an interesting issue because I think we meet in the middle on a lot of these things. There are disagreements on government's benches on this. There are disagreements within the Labour Party on this, whether that's a Lords reform, whether that's electoral reform, whether that's devolution. We have disagreements within our parties. That actually is a good thing, and pretending that we don't is a bad thing. So, I think that makes these debates very interesting. And I actually agreed with an awful lot that he had to say, particularly the twin points that our constitution and the union more generally is under strain. But also that this is, I think, at the root of tackling our economic challenges as well. So I thought the points you made were very good. We were well represented from the Cheshire caucus as well. And I heard what the honourable member said, the honourable member for Weaver Vale said in his intervention about getting a deal for Cheshire and for Warrington. I heard from the honourable member, the member for Ellesmere Port and Neston, about the multiple hoops and hurdles that it feels like their community has to clear just to take some degree of control over what happens to them. And I was particularly taken with what my honourable friend, the member for the City of Chester, said about the way in which they've got themselves organised. So a lot of the complications and the hurdles that the member said in opening actually don't apply because you're organised. And I've got an awful lot of confidence in our local leaders. I love local government. I'm a localist at heart. And so my commitment to the people of Cheshire would be is that we believe that they should have access to the maximum powers as set out in not just in the levelling up white paper, but as we'll go further, as I will set out, and that shouldn't be contingent on a governance model. That is for them to decide, not for me. And, I strongly believe that. And actually, so that takes me to the points the honourable member for Lee made, and that actually I think the different models is a strength, because I want them to reflect local realities, whether that's the geographic realities, whether that's a cultural thing, whatever it is. The thing for me is that they should all have access to those same powers, but how they organise themselves, well, I think that should be a local decision. And the honourable member for Strangford made very important points about union, and this is fundamentally a question of our union. And he used the word legacy. I think for me, the thing that weighs on me is that we, every generation, every parliament as elected, are that period of time's custodians of our constitution, of our democracy and of our union. That's a quite heavy weight to bear. And we all have a responsibility to say that at the end of our time, whether that's a short or long one, that we safeguarded it, we protected it, and we bequeathed it to the next generation in a strong and healthy way. And that, I think, is much of our challenge. The honourable gentleman in opening said that we're too centralised, and I wholly agree with that point. I think that we hold communities back because we have a system that holds power in this place, a system that thinks that we know, whether it's skills, transport, planning, job support, we know better for our communities than the people who actually live there. And I fundamentally disagree with that point. It's created an unbalanced economy, and one that makes too little use of the talents of too few people in too few places, with the rest of us, my community is one of them, written off as not being able to contribute. And that, I think, is why there is so much appetite for a new approach, and that's underpinned so much of our political debate over the last decade. The yearning for people to have more control over their lives and more control over the country, the clamour for a fairer future with new opportunities for a next generation, and the desire to build back proud communities supported by strong local economies and underpinned by decent public services. And the country knows it's time for change. And we've seen, obviously, the devolution of power to England's regions in recent years, but it's not sufficient. It's too many deals, it's too modest, and too many places shut out. And it should, be a point of, I think, great anger to many of us, especially those who are locked out of that settlement at the moment, like many colleagues are, that at some point ministers looked at leaders in parts of the country, whether that's the West Midlands, Teesside, Greater Manchester, and thought that they were good enough to have certain powers, and they looked at the rest of us and thought that we were not. I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think by dint of our common personhood, we should have access to those same opportunities. And that's why the Leader of the Opposition asked the former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, to carry out a report on the future of the UK, which we're consulting on at the moment, but I think contains really great proposals that at their heart would be the biggest ever transfer of power from Westminster to the British people. Arguably.
I'm extremely grateful to him for giving me. I have to say, from a Welsh perspective, the Gordon Brown report was extremely unambitious. So can I just encourage the Labour front bench? I think there's a huge opportunity for Labour here going into the general election to deal with many of these issues, especially empowering the Welsh Government with the very necessary fiscal levers it needs to deal with the Welsh economy. Can I just encourage the Labour front bench to be as ambitious as possible going into the next election?
I'm grateful for that intervention, and I will take that as a contribution to our consultation on this. And that point's been well made by our Welsh colleagues as well. So that's been heard. And the sort of things that we're talking about, again, the Leader of the Opposition set out in January in our Take Back Control Bill, which is about new powers for our communities over skills, over the DWP, transport, planning, culture, all helping to drive growth by developing hundreds of clusters of economic activity. And, you know, I think this is a fundamental shift of power and something to be really excited about, and I know I certainly am. And power is one half of the arrangement, but the other one, of course, is finance. And we have to change what the Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands called the broken begging bowl culture. And Local Government Association research has shown that over the 4 years to 2019, there were 448 separate funding pots into which councils were invited to bid for funding. And much of this was fairly basic services like cleaning chewing gum up or having more public toilets. And we need to get away with this, from this competitive bidding process where the government picks winners or losers and someone always loses. In fact, the winners are losers because the money they get back is less than they've had cut from their budget. So we need to end the beauty parades as soon as possible. You know, particularly the government really must address the point that they don't want to around levelling up Fund Round 2, where many communities up and down the country put their heart and souls into really good bids, only to find out later they could never win. I mean, what's contempt to be held in? That has to change. And I'll just use my remaining time available, Mr. Varg, just to talk about our union also, because a debate about the Constitution and devolution is a conversation about union. I'm a unionist in many senses of the word, a trade unionist all my adult life, a UK unionist for as long as I can remember. I believe strongly in the power of the collective and of cooperation, that I value your contribution, you value mine, and that together we're better than the sum of our parts. But unionism isn't just something, you know, unionist isn't something you are, unionism is something you think, unionism is something you do every day. You know, you work that muscle to build that. And it is clear that, you know, the next government will have a huge job in restoring our union. I am sad to say, because it is a loss to all of us, but the government has been the best friend to nationalism when those who wish to leave our union could ever have had. And again, we need to restore our settlement, and I think the Brown Commission spoke very persuasively on this, to a union of equals, restating that self-government and shared government is hugely beneficial to all the nations of the UK. Restating that we believe in local decision-making, not just when the decision is one that we want making, but actually that those differences strengthen us rather than they weaken us. And restating that there is huge economic potential across all of our nations and regions, but there just isn't the same degree of opportunity. And the test, I believe, for us in this place is now, you know, we have reached, I believe, a positive consensus on devolution, at least in England. I think we have to do much more in Scotland and Wales, as other colleagues have said. And the challenge now is to get that power and get those resources out of this place to those communities, you know, really setting those communities free, because that's how we will improve those communities, that's how we will restore the public's faith in democracy, frankly, and that's how we'll get economic growth that benefits everyone going. It's a really big prize and one that's incumbent on us to deliver on. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And what a pleasure it is to be responding in this debate. This very wide-ranging debate. And I must congratulate my great friend, my honourable friend from Hitchin Harpenden, for securing it. And he was kind enough to remind or tell the Chamber at the outset that I used to be a history teacher. And I couldn't help but sort of remember marking, you know, bright undergraduates' essays and sometimes writing on it, you know, it's a very good essay, but I can't help but think you might have got the title wrong. So, you know, what we've got here is really sort of four overlapping debates. One on history, which I shall indulge in. One on English devolution, the nature of English devolution. One on UK devolution, and another on on the structures of the Constitution. And obviously these things interlink. But it was quite right for my honourable friend from Strangford to mention where we were, in Westminster Hall, and mention Central Lobby, which is the very embodiment of our four nations and the four physical parts of our Constitution. You know, the Lords, the Commons, you know, the ancient Westminster Hall and the committee rooms all coming together, along with England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And you know, the Honourable Lady from Aberdeen North was mentioned how William Wallace was tried in Westminster Hall, but she did not mention that it was where James VI was greeted when he came to be both King of England and King of Scotland.
And the evolution of these two ancient kingdoms is, really tells us a lot about where the debates on localism come from, because they are very old indeed. The shires of England are in several cases known to be older, not just than England, but date, in the case of Kent, to probably the pre-Roman period. And when we hear about debates about whether Wigan should be allowed to switch over, one was reminded of the very passionate arguments there were against Humberside. Indeed, one is sort of, and I thought he was very brave in this company to refer to the problem of Cheshire, because we heard powerful advocacy on behalf of the people of Cheshire for the sort of local representation they would like. But it was the shires. It was from the shires of England that Parliament was formed in the 13th century. Representatives of the Shire, but it was representatives of the Shire, leaders of the Shire, who were also represented in the Witan in the pre-conquest period. These are very old structures, they're very old identities, and this history still infuses the debates that we are having today about where boundaries should lie and about where power should derive. Obviously, the answer is in the interaction between the centre and the locality. And the adequate balance of those two powers. Now, in discussing English devolution, I sort of respect the remarks of my opposite number on how these are issues that do cross party lines, and I think it's contributed to the fact that we've had a very open and good-natured debate today. And the reason it cuts cross party lines is because it's not easy, and because there is variation in how people see things in different parts of the country based on their geography, based on their history, and based on their recent experiences. Pity me somewhat, for I am merely a parliamentary secretary in the Cabinet Office and not a minister in the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. But I will. I have heard the representations made by members from Cheshire, and I will be certain to report those representations to ministers in DLUC, and I'm sure that they will consider thoughtfully what's been said and consider the request for a meeting. This government has been a very powerful advocate for devolution. It's practiced what it's preached, and I've seen the results of it in my time in government. My last job but one, I was lucky enough to be the Minister for Apprenticeships, and I saw in Teesside the new Tory mayor working there with central government and local communities and business to create staggering new opportunities, and it was really the first time that I'd seen all of these things come together. The government created the Freeport, created a place where there could be opportunity. The mayor got in touch with BP and said, here's a place we can do business. Come and put your hydrogen plant here. And BP went to the local colleges and said, we want the people who are coming through your college to get the jobs in our plant. And so you were seeing opportunities created by negotiation between central and local government for local people. And that, I strongly believe, is levelling up. The government, in answer to my honourable friend from Hitchin Harpenden's point on standardisation versus variation, and my honourable friend from Aberconwy's fears of the cookie cutter, well, we have cookie cutters of several different shapes, and there are, we think the best way of delivering effective devolution. The opportunity for there to be combined authorities, for there to be combined county authorities, for there to be individual local authorities, unitary authorities, based on the needs and experience of local communities. But if we go now to the devolution
across the UK. And I debated this point with the lady from Aberdeen North before. She said that the use of Section 35 should only have been exceptional. Well, it has only been used once. If there was any greater illustration of how it's only used in exceptional circumstances, the fact that in devolution's, national devolution's 25-year history, it has been only used once, and then in very particular circumstances on very sound legal advice, in order to maintain the balance of laws across the United Kingdom. I hope that, I know that she won't, but I hope that she will see that shows that the mechanisms of devolution are to a certain extent working and being respected. And I do, I acknowledge entirely what my honourable friend from Strangford said about, my honourable friend from Abercrombie said about, the need for there to be respect between nations. That is absolutely right. We are all in this together. But we must also, in respecting those relationships, understand that this building is one of the places in which the nations come together, and that there remains a role for the UK Parliament in the structures of the United Kingdom. Now, that whistle-stop tour, Madam Chair, doesn't necessarily answer everybody's individual questions, but I'm very happy to come back to any honourable member who feels I haven't covered their points. What I would say is that, perhaps contrary to the honourable gentleman opposite, happy to give way to my honourable friend.
I'm really interested in the responses across the room, and as I say, the debate's been commendable for the tone with which it's been conducted. I must make the observation, though, that when the devolved assembly was introduced by the Labour government, it had an unintended consequence. The anecdote of the time, of course, is that this will deal with nationalism, and with great respect, we have a very strong nationalist presence here in this House, in this administration. Has the Minister given thought, then, to that factor of unintended consequences? And I cite one example in the tax-raising powers. So tax-raising powers have been devolved, but in one case, i.e. in Wales, they have not been taken up. And so I use this as a further illustration of some of this unevenness and natural response. The phrase I used was desire lines. Perhaps you might like to comment on that in the minutes he has left.
Well, a few people have thought about this more than my honourable friend. Yes, he is certainly right in saying that the Labour Party was wrong in its assessment that its plans for devolution would kill nationalism. Although I think these were cross-cutting issues even at the time, and that I seem to remember Charles Clarke arguing openly that the government was mistaken, and that actually this would empower the nationalists. So it goes to show that parties can hold different views. But I would disagree with on one thing with the honourable gentleman from the honourable gentleman Nottingham. Thank you. The honourable gentleman from Nottingham is that. I actually think that the Constitution of the United Kingdom remains incredibly strong. Indeed, it seems capable of coping with everything we throw at it. But one of its great strengths over the centuries has been its ability to adapt and evolve and grow. And I think that in the agenda that this government is pursuing with regards to devolution in England, it is doing just that.
Then allow me to wind up.
I thank the Minister, members opposite, members on this side of the House for the really interesting and thoughtful debate today. I'd just like to finish by simply saying that if we go back to 1265, there was, and I think this is the nub of the debate around English devolution is this. In 1265, and indeed for centuries subsequent to that, there were 2 MPs sent amongst citizens from the town, 2 leading citizens from the town came to Westminster, and 2 knights came from the counties. And indeed, we've heard from the Minister the historical respect of which the shires have been held. it is not standardisation to say that we can have that sort of respect for the relationship between all local areas and the centre. And I would urge everybody to bear that in mind, and simply also to say that if we are serious about more power for local people, that's going to need to mean more money. And if we're serious about more money, we are going to have to clarify the responsibilities much more clearly between local authorities and the Treasury. Thank you.
Order, order.